Hi, thanks for joining us today. The game of Monopoly as we know it was developed in 1935 by Charles Darrow. Despite the success of the game, the rules are considered to be somewhat complicated. Throughout the years, additional rules have been developed, which are referred to as house rules, and that's rules that have been made up by the players. These house rules have been handed down from generation to generation, and generally they make the game a lot longer than its original design. A recent study was completed, and it was determined that 67% of the people that play Monopoly today have not read the rules. So these house rules have been handed down to them without their knowledge. Hasbro and Parker Brothers strongly suggest not playing house rules and stick to the rules that were published. However, let's take a look, because they themselves have changed the rules, deliberately or by error. Don't worry, I'm not going to read all the rules of Monopoly to you. What I will do though is split this down into two parts. The first part, we're going to look at the classic game of Monopoly. That's the game that was developed back in 1935. The second part, we're going to look at the variations of the game that fall under the name of Monopoly. And we're going to take a look at those and see if they've actually muddied the water and encouraged house rules. So first of all, let's start with the classic game of Monopoly. Throughout the years, there's always been an income and a luxury tax squares. Originally, if you landed on the income tax, you had to pay $200 or 10% of your assets. In 2002, a commemorative edition was issued, and the $200 was changed to $300 plus 10%. In 2015, an 80th anniversary edition was issued, and the income tax on that board, as you can see, is just a straight $200. For those who have the Leeds London edition, I know definitely in 1961, that's the board that I have, that is again a straight $200. Going on to luxury tax, it started off with you had to pay $75, and that has now since changed to $100. You'll have to forgive me for referring to them as dollars. I know it's Monopoly cash. Anyway, talking about cash, the amount that you receive at the beginning of the game has not changed. It's always been $1,500. However, the denominations have changed 3 or 4 times. The most popular denomination or combination of cash that you receive is 2 500s, 2 100s, 2 50s, 6 20s, 5 10s, 5 5s, and 5 singles. And as I said, that actually has changed 4 or 5 times. The most recent change is the Cheetahs edition that came out in 2018, and they have eliminated the 5 and also the single. Before you start the game, you have to decide who is going to move first, and that is done by the roll of the dice. Originally, it was the honor of the banker to roll the dice first, followed by the other players. Here are a few sets that state that anyone can throw the dice first. In fact, if we take a look at the Star Wars edition that was issued in 2008, it starts off by saying that the banker should roll the dice first, and then it goes on to say that anyone can throw the dice first. I know what you're thinking. These are minor changes in the rules and they have no impact on the game, and I would agree with you 100%. My point is, I guess, is that if you start adding all these changes in the rules and you get players together and one player has one set, one player has been playing the rules from another set, it just adds to the confusion of who is right and who is wrong. Okay, now the game is underway. We've figured out the cash and we figured out who rolls the dice first. One of the players moves their token on a property, and it's vacant property and they can buy it, but they decide not to. So it goes to bidding. So what does the bidding start at? Well, if you play one game, let's say the Star Wars edition, that will be $1. If you played the 80th anniversary edition or the signature edition, that's $10. And if you played most of the other games of the classic game of Monopoly, it's any price. Once you get into the variations of Monopoly, that can range from $20 up to $10 million. And in fact, if you played the Stock Exchange edition, that was an edition that actually came out in England, and nobody wants to bid on a property, you can get it for free. However, I'm going to talk about those type of games in the second part. Going back to the classic game, what if nobody wants to bid on the property? Is that okay? Well, once again, it depends what edition you're playing. If we look at the Signature Token Edition that was released in 2015, it states, and let me just read this to you, what if no one wants it? That's fine, no one pays anything. But if we go to an early edition that was, let's say, the Deluxe Edition that was released in 1995 by Parker Brothers, let me once again just read the last paragraph to you. Any player, including the one who declined the option of buying it at the printed price, may bid. Bidding may start at any price. And it leaves it there. It kind of leaves you hanging. It does not state in the rules that if nobody wants to auction the property off, that is fine. You just carry on. But leaving a rule open-ended like that will lead to house rules. One player is going to say, yes, it's mandatory that you auction properties, and another player is going to say, no, it is not mandatory, which leads us to our next subject, and that is utilities. The rent you have to pay when you land on a utility is determined by the roll of the dice. If you own one utility, you pay 4 times the amount that is shown on the dice. If you own 2 utilities, you pay 10 times the amount that is shown on the dice. That's simple enough, but do you roll a dice again to determine how much rent you pay? Again, for the most part, that's been an open-ended question. Let's look at the classic Monopoly. This was the game that was produced by Winning Moves in 2009. By the way, the dates I use are the last dates on the rules themselves, so they may vary a little bit. So don't hold me to those. Okay, back to the rules. Paying rent. When you land on a property owned by another player, the owner collects the rent from you in accordance with the list price on its title deed card. And if you go to the title deed card for one of the, or both the utilities, it does not state that you have to roll the dice again. So the assumption is whatever you rolled to get you to that particular utility is the number that you use to determine your rent. Okay, let's look at a 2014 edition of Monopoly, and let me read you the rules as far as rent is concerned for utilities. It states, when you land on a utility that someone else owns, pay them rent. Roll a dice again to decide rent. If the owner has one utility, rent is 4 times the dice roll. If the owner has 2 utilities, rent is 10 times the dice roll. So there again, you can see that there are 2 different rules for landing on utilities and determining what rent you should pay. And actually, just as a footnote, if you play the online version of Monopoly, it's going to calculate your rent based on what you rolled initially when you land on a utility. Okay, talking about rolling the dice, let's just talk a little bit about getting out of jail. You may find yourself in jail because you rolled doubles 3 times in a row. Well, one of your options to get out of jail is to roll doubles again within your next 3 turns. But the question is, if you roll doubles to get out of jail, can you roll again? If we look at the Heirloom edition that was released somewhere about 1996, it states here, let me just quickly read the rules if I can find it here. Even though you had thrown doubles, you do not take another turn. So it clearly states that if you throw doubles to get out of jail, you do not throw the dice again. But if we look at the Bookshelf Vintage Edition that was released in 2015, and this was put out by WS Game Company, but it is licensed by Hasbro, it does not state that. It just says that you roll doubles to get out of jail. It does not state that that's the end of your term, once again leaving it open-ended. Okay, we're going to stay in jail just for one more minute because I got one more inconsistency. What can you do, or what privileges do you have when you're in jail? And if we look at this is a 1961 version of Monopoly, and it says a player may buy and erect a house, sell a property, and collect rents even though he is in jail. Should be he or she, but that was 1961. But if we look at the 2008 Star Wars edition, it states, while in jail, you can collect rents on properties, providing they are not mortgaged. It does not mention any other privileges other than just collecting rent, once again, leading to some confusion. I've used the Star Wars edition as an example on a couple of occasions, and I'm most sure some of you are thinking, well, hold on, these are special editions, themed editions like sports, movies, that sort of thing. However, those are based on the classic game of Monopoly, so therefore I think they are fair game in comparison. And the rules that we're looking at are rules that are related to the classic game of Monopoly and also are shown in these special editions. Once again, in the second part, I am going to talk about the other variations of Monopoly are kind of completely different. Before we segue into the second part, I just want to mention one thing, and that's an inconsistency between a European version of the game and the United States version of the game. And it comes down to how much rent can you collect if you have a monopoly. Let's say if you have the 3 yellows, you own the 3 yellows, your rent on each one will double. In the United States version, if one of those 3 are mortgaged, you can still collect double the rent on the 2 unmortgaged properties. But in the European version of the game, if you own the same monopoly and one of the properties is mortgaged, you are not allowed to collect double rent on the 2 unmortgaged properties. So they're completely the opposite to each other. Which once again, I'm not quite sure why that came about, if that was an error or if that was deliberate. I assume it was most probably an error because it seems to be such a crazy change of the rules. Anyway, let's segue into the second part, and we're going to start off actually by talking about free parking. And it's going to be a segue from the first part into the second part.